Like, I'm going to be using it to read. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to be reading off the screen.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Is your microphone on?
Can you hear me?
I don't think it's on.
How do I turn it off?
It's on the bottom, the button.
Just, is that on? Technical. Okay, that's on. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. This presentation is called The Unknown Image, Notes from the Field, an Autumn Harvest of Autocosmology. So initially, I was going to present this as to report back on the autocosmology course that Ashton and I, over the past weekend, were able to we were able to TA with Brian and Carolyn along with Ari and Ezekiel. And this title comes from a phrase that recently emerged for me as I've been thinking about working with an ecology of ambiguity. And so it feels like a dynamic way to move through my reading and my scholarship and to maintain the question of the unknown image, which often feels really fruitful for me. And so this was the title of the practice and exercise I offered in our course. And Ashton's going to tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm here to provide some context and to riff with Alexis to the extent that she would like to do so. So as Alexis referenced and as Avon mentioned the other day when they were introducing the new PCC journal, I think this was in response to a question that Claire asked about whether or not there would be different kinds of media welcomed by the PCC journal. And Avon made a reference to this new initiative, which is a kind of update, I guess, of something that's been transpiring for a while called Starborn, the Journal for Autocosmology. And this is arising out of Brian and Carolyn's collaborations. So that'll give you a little bit of that background. But also just to mention, Avon and Rahal and Andy were part of this intensive Friday and Saturday. So you can talk to them about it if you're curious. But yeah, so I started PCC in 2017, and I think you started in 16.
Yeah.
And I think it was around then that Brian and Carolyn Cook is an MFA professor, for those who don't know who she is. That was when they started to teach their collaborative courses, and they were bringing artists and PCCers, philosophers together with the hopes that there might be generated some kind of synergy between them, with the ideal that the ideas that we're exploring in PCC be translated into mediums that might be more accessible to others, and out of that arose this idea that Brian's working with, and Carolyn as well, called autocosmology. The first person to use that term actually was Ursula K. Le Guin, but she was using it more in reference to science fiction. So that's the sort of central concept that this journal revolves around. And this intensive was like those courses that Brian and Carolyn used to offer, but also was kind of cooked up at the last retreat when Ezekiel and Carolyn got together. And another thing I didn't mention was that out of those courses back in like 2018 or 19, Ari Makridakis, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but yeah.
Matt, yes.
Yeah, something like that. He and I edited together some work that students had submitted at the end of the semester, and produced the first issue of the Autocosmology Journal. And then it kind of, we let it lie for a bit. And Ezekiel, talking to Carolyn at the last retreat, Ezekiel Fugit, was like, we should do this again. And so that's where this initiative to do the intensive kind of catalyzed, and why we're revamping the journal. And so Brian's recent Cosmogenesis, you could say, is a kind of early exemplar of what autocosmology might be. And for him, it's really kind of thematizing, what he refers to as the time developmental nature of consciousness in the cosmos, and trying to make work from that insight. And so you could think of it as a genre, a literary genre, or an interpretive lens. And so, but really it's a kind of open question. You could consider it as well a kind of continuation of the sort of German idealist romantic idea that the human is, among perhaps other creatures as well, the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. So to create work that reflects this and tries to catalyze it as an experience in others. But anyway, so it's still an open question as to what it is and how it expresses itself through different mediums. And so if you're interested, we invite you to submit to it. But yes, as also Alexis mentioned, during the intensive, we all offer different workshops. And her workshop, The Unknown Image, she was just remarking earlier after Jesse and Michael presented that there was already so much brought up that she's sort of continuing, in the sense that you could think of what Alexis is doing with her practice in courting the unknown image as a kind of extension of Goethe's method into the imaginal or the conceptual realm. And so that I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Ashton. That's great. And also, here is a Substack where you can find where you can contribute and send in submissions. So we hope everyone will get involved, which is another reason we wanted to have this presentation to share. And it's a really great place to combine art and philosophy, which, there we go, which is really at the heart of this idea of the unknown image. It's a place of access. And so one of the main thinkers that I'm learning about and hoping to forge a deeper relationship with, which is why I'm bringing him up here, is Gaston Bachelard. And I was first introduced to his work through Cosmological Powers with Brian and Carolyn back in the spring of 2018. We had a really beautiful, fruitful class where we were learning about the cosmological powers through different writers that other than Brian. So we were reading fiction and poetry, and Psychoanalysis of Fire was one of the pieces that we read. And this was in correspondence to the cosmological power of transmutation. So I fell in love with his writing. And then again, this past spring in aesthetics, with Jack, we read a passage from the Poetics of Space where I fell even more deeply in love with him. So there's many ways we can speak of him. He was the chair of history and the philosophy of sciences at the Sorbonne from 1940 to 1954, very much a multidisciplinary scholar, from physics to phenomenology, psychoanalysis to poetry, and all spaces in between. I've come to think of him very much as a philosopher of details, someone easy to follow on a magical mystery tour, meandering down rabbit holes, mirroring the discursive nature of his scholarship. And I also like to think of him as a wizard of enchantment, a bard to the mystery, and a steward of the poetic imagination. And I wanted to include this image of him because I think that it captures that quite nicely. So he offers, I'm excited to learn more about him, and he offers a place to dream. And so, again, the first image that we saw at the very beginning, this is the same artist, so I just want to give her a shout out. It's one of my favorite artists here, Rithka Merchant, and her work is quite magical. This is all gouache and ink and watercolor on paper. She also works with embroidery hoops, so I recommend checking her out. But this idea of ontological amplification, Bachelard says the image is the specific phenomena of the speaking creature. And he uses Bachelard's philosophy. Amplification is related to how our understanding of reality expands through scientific inquiry and poetic imagination, which is why I believe he's a great partner to artists and creatives. And so I want to just speak to these 3 points of where amplification, where I've been drawn to, where it comes into his work. Again, just want to speak to the fact that I'm not an expert on Bachelard. This is more of a courtship that I'm trying to form with him. So I wanted to share these ideas with you because they're really exciting to me. So this idea of epistemological ruptures, Bachelard believed that scientific progress occurs through discontinuities or ruptures that expand our conceptual frameworks. Poetic imagination, he saw that poetic imagination as a way to amplify our perception and understanding of reality, revealing new aspects of the world and the phenomenology of imagination. Bachelard explored how images and symbols can amplify our experience of reality, particularly in his works on the elements, fire, water, air, and earth. And as someone who's grown up in California, I think of fire a lot. And that's also a season that we now have. So thinking of the known and unknown ways in which that contributes to my thinking, I like to move into the elementals as ways to explore this. So coming to the unknown image, again, as Ashton spoke to, it was really fantastic that both Jesse and Michael went before, because they were pulling in thinkers that are woven in through both Ashton and I's scholarship and our thinking, and woven in through this presentation with Goethe and Coleridge and now Bachelard here. So for Bachelard, imagination was at once receptive and creative, an acoustic for listening, an acoustic of listening, and an art of participation. The world itself dreams, he said, and we can help give it voice. The image is the specific phenomena of the speaking creature. The highest act of imagination is the will to attune oneself to the saying of being itself. So this over here is an image of one depiction of how I was working through the ideas of 2 forces of 1 power, which Jesse was, if any of you were hopefully here for Jesse's beautiful presentation. What I've had to do coming into a philosophy program as an artist is to work through ideas in different ways than reading them down a page. And it's been quite helpful to me. And also, I've been thinking from the very beginning of ways to share these ideas in the world that have been so fertile, ways that are accessible, because there's such a steep learning curve for the vocabulary of philosophy that I've just noticed since I've been here since 2016. It's been massive. So the unknown image is a way for me to engage with this idea of ontological amplification that can prove fruitful for me. So when I think of epistemological ruptures, they can be portals to emergent epistemologies, new and ancient ways of knowing, knowledge reclamation. They may provide fertile ground for deconstructing normative views of subjectivity by cultivating one's sympathetic imagination. And then The poetic image supports the cultivation of mythopoetic origins, identities, always remembering that the image is living and dynamic, deepening our sense of embeddedness in earth and cosmos. And then phenomenology of imagination leads us into the realms of reverence, where our amazement may shift to admiration, and one's admiration may lead to deep care and reciprocity of relations. So it feels to me like an open invitation that's been generative to me of, and one of the ways I was thinking about it as well is like it could be thought of as a womb space or an alchemical alembic, a place to go and allow the images and ideas that arise to have a certain autonomy so that they can remain always living, always dynamic, and just as it's the unknown image is a relational field, and I'm reading Catherine Keller's From a Broken Web right now, and one of the it reminds me of the idea of a composite of complexity. So just to deepen a sense of listening to see what may want to emerge as new ways of knowing. And Brian often calls forth the need for new languages, and that stumps me every time. How does that happen? I don't know, but I've found that the combination of art and philosophy has been so fruitful. So I wanted to offer up to the community just different ways of engaging, and also to be able to hear back other folks' practices, how they come to build intimacy with these ideas so that they can keep living and expanding. I just want to also bring in, I don't know if, yes, Kate's right here too. In her beautiful presentation, she references Bergson's cloak of memory. Yeah, a cloak of memory. And that image was so potent for me as well. And as she spoke it, and I was kind of imagining what would it look like if you were reading Bergson, thinking about what it might be to like be wearing a cloak of memory, or how that shape shifts or transmutes through the process of learning. And also just thinking of our intellectual and spiritual lineage. And so using these ways to form deeper relationships with the thinkers who are working through these ideas. And yeah, do you have anything else to add, Ashton?
Well, I'll just say that Alexis and I live near each other now, so we like go on walks and talk a lot. And we're always talking about things like this, and just talking about ideas in general. And what I've noticed is that, in addition to what you've just described as this being a kind of practice that one, reading philosophy might engage in to sort of develop a relationship with certain concepts, that maybe one is kind of struggling to assimilate and to live with them, and to give them image and shape. I think it's also has consequence for how one is in dialogue with others, and with regard to how fixed one is with one's opinions about certain ideas or things like that. So that's something.
Yeah, beautiful. It is true. It's a great blessing. We're constantly in dialogue and conversation, which is a great way of being in community. And yeah, I feel like, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like oftentimes when we perhaps meet an impasse of ideas aligning, we find a way to move through it. And that's another way to enter into this kind of unknown image, to see what may be in the field that you don't see immediately. So to think about these, the epistemological ruptures, and what it means to tend deeply to the ideas, and also the idea of reverence. So to be in, to hold a posture of reverence for these ideas, and the privilege that it is to be able to spend so much time thinking about them and being in this program. Yeah.
Amen.
Thanks, dog. Thanks, y'all. I think that's what we got.
reach a kind of impasse, and this idea of a field that can possibly contain a connection. That to me is one of the most interesting things because I see ideas reaching impasses based on vocabulary so often, and they're really the same idea, actually. I mean, they're so close that. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that. I think it's a very rich idea. Like, kind of hold that space so that almost like a spark can leap across it, or somebody can feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak in generalizations just about, Ashton and I in conversations when we're wrestling with things. Sometimes it is a matter of the words we're using and how we're using them. And we're both equally really curious about language. And so um, sometimes it leads into a deep dive into some etymology or further curiosity. Of or even this idea, this might be a little bit divergent, but I've been listening to a lot of conversations and talking to Ashton about this with Jeffrey Kreipel, who's been brought up here. And what I appreciate so much about hearing him speak is this generosity of people's experiences. And so that's something that I've been thinking about more, that we don't necessarily have to make meaning of them the same way or make meaning of them at all, but to have reverence and compassion and generosity to when somebody is choosing to share experiences and it's something that maybe you can't grasp or maybe you disagree with. And I think I'd love to think more with folks in the community and more broadly, because I think that in the larger ethos, this is really one of the biggest problems.
I think an interesting question is that or that we're all trained to or this or that, and how to shift into and. That's not a conflating and. It's a really generous and. So
Yeah, I think in Jesse's presentation and what Coleridge is doing is, and also like this very accessible idea of an unknown image is a field of possibility. And so for really allowing that both and.
Thank you both so much. It was really rich. And actually, to build on Candace's point, I was very struck by your kind of concluding lines and wrestling with ideas. I just wanted to bring in the name of Otto Sharma, who's a systems thinker and mostly writes for the business audience, actually, which is quite interesting. He was at MIT, I'm not sure if he's still there, but he has this idea of the theory U, which is a space of generosity that he has, especially to groups. And it could be like a classroom, it could be a business, it could be a board of directors. I used it in nonprofit work and academic work, but he encourages people to sort of drop their preconceptions and move into this space of allowing, he says, allowing the future to emerge, which sounded very much like what you were talking about. And so I think there might be some really interesting resonances with what you're working on and what he has described. And he may even be drawn on Bachelor, I'm not sure. He draws on a lot of philosophers. But it's also a very sort of pragmatic and practical approach to moving across difference and also finding new ideas that are like out there, as Brian would say, alluring us forward, right? But we haven't quite encountered.
Oh, great. Thank you.
That I really enjoyed that so much. And, as you're talking about this last point about, resolving, I don't know if you call it conflict or whatever, a difference of ideas. I mean, it also, for me, brought up this idea of the art of listening and
so maybe you want to say a little bit about that. I mean, how we listen and where we are when we listen, and if we are, I think we can have this kind of listening where we seem to be listening, but really we're already forming our rebuttal as opposed to actually really taking in, which is kind of similar to what you were saying. Anyway, do you have any thoughts around that as well?
Yes. There's a whole mess of a map where this idea started that wouldn't be coherent to maybe anybody but me. And one of the also key components of this is deep listening. And so for some of you that may have been in the room last night, I offered up like an emerging poem that's been coming through from really a practice of deep listening. And so I want to the first class I had with Brian Swim, co-facilitated by Carrie Brady, is called Nature and Eros, and I was introduced to the Animas Valley Institute, which was founded by Bill Plotkin, and one of our PCC alums, Janine Marie Haugen, is also a facilitator there, and the two of them have been great mentors to me since 2018. And I would say most broadly, it's a way of deep listening to earth, to the dreaming, to the image, to each other. And so a lot of my scholarship now has been really shaped and informed by land-based practices that I've learned with and through them. And I highly recommend Janine's dissertation that was chaired by Brian and Carolyn on awakening planetary imagination. And so, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of different ways that I know I can only speak for myself, that this process of going through PCC has been just as much unweaving of a tapestry. And right now, I'm hoping that I have some threads that can weave something to offer into the future. But it's been a lot of deconstruction, which has been super generative and fruitful. But studying philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness from all of our brilliant professors and in conversation with our community has been more generative. And I was in a highly creative job before this as a designer, and my creative tank was at a deficit. So I think it's just endlessly generative what we're up to here, and there's so many different ways to engage. Yeah.